Hello again. The enthusiasm of those preaching the merits of multiculturalism in Britain knows no bounds. The impression sometimes gained is that just one more push will do it in reaching the multi-ethnic paradise just around the corner. If only we all make a little more effort. Every announcement from charities, government departments, public bodies, and even commercial companies such as supermarkets and banks now feature the slogans of diversity and inclusion. We are so nearly there. It all puts one in mind of the colourful images of the afterlife which are to be seen in publications by the Jehovah's Witnesses. We see a happy land where Indians and Chinese people cheerfully rub shoulders with Caribbeans and Africans, while Arabs and Jews sit down together to share a meal, and presumably the lion also lays down with the lamb. The future, it seems, is both multi-ethnic and also very bright and cheerful. This alluring mirage, though, seems very far from being attained, at least for now, and it's on the streets of London and other large British cities where the actual veridical results of the multicultural project may most clearly be seen. Despite the hopes of the idealists, London has not been a successful experiment in multiculturalism. Indeed, the introduction of a wide mix of ethnicities, nationalities, and religions into the capital has led not to greater tolerance and understanding, but rather to the division of the city into a network of ethnic enclaves and petty chiefdoms, more in keeping with the medieval period than a 21st century society. Rather than a vibrant mixing of cultures and a shared experience of each other's traditions, the city has been informally divided between the newcomers into self-contained zones. In London boroughs such as Redbridge, those from the Indian subcontinent tend to settle. Even here, though, separate communities are the rule. In the east of the borough, Seven Kings is the acknowledged territory of Sikhs, while the streets around the centre of Ilford are occupied more by Hindus. As one moves further to the west of the borough, more Muslims are to be found. In the same way, although boroughs like Hackney and Haringey have many districts which appear to be chiefly black, these too are split along tribal lines, a condition contributing distinctly to the so-called postcode wars. Those living in the E8 postal district will launch drive-by shootings against the inhabitants of N17 or E9. Sometimes the divisions are even more refined in that those living on one housing estate will find themselves in a state of bitter enmity with the inhabitants of another group of flats living just a few hundred yards away. The expression balkanisation was coined in the 19th century to describe the fragmentation of the Balkans as the rule of the Ottoman Empire declined into a collection of little statelets and small nations, divided up by those speaking different languages, following different religions, or even using different alphabets. In the Balkans, some used the Roman alphabet, while others wrote in the Cyrillic script. Today, there are Catholics, Muslims, and members of the Orthodox Church, Albanians, Croats, and Serbs. With the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire in 1918 and the formation of the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, later, of course, the Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, it might have been thought that if ever there were a perfect recipe for a multicultural society, Yugoslavia was surely it. It was this separation of identities between the region's constituent states, however, that led to the barbarity of the wars fought across the territory of the former state of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. And those with any knowledge of history were able to see how the wind was likely to blow once the iron grip of Marshal Tito upon Yugoslavia was relaxed when he died in 1989. Such trends are littered throughout history. When India became independent in 1947, it might have been thought that with the withdrawal of colonial forces, Hindus and Muslims would all live together in amity rather than massacring each other and driving neighbours from their homes on a scale that produced millions of refugees. Upon the establishment of the State of Israel a year later in what was Palestine, it might have happened that Arabs and Jews would forge a multicultural community founded upon mutual trust and respect. Alas, that was not quite how matters resolved themselves. In the same way, the island of Cyprus looks as though it could have been a perfect example of multiculturalism. Greek Christians and Turkish Muslims should be able to rub along together well enough, surely. Well, the communal riots and massacres followed by the Turkish invasion and division of the island into two hostile territories separated by barbed wire and minefields tells another story. But who could ever have thought that following the independence of Nigeria in 1960, the Muslim Hausa, Igbo, and Yoruba would fall upon each other with the murderous intent in a bitter and genocidal civil war? Whenever Muslims and Christians, Africans and Indians, or Jews and Gentiles living in the same city, they have a tendency to form separate communities which can sometimes be seen as ghettos or ethnic enclaves. Whether this should or should not be the case, or if this is a natural and healthy process, is not at issue. The simple fact is that this is what happens. The notion that Britain might prove an exception to this tendency is strange and incomprehensible. Why on earth would things have turned out any differently in this country than they did in South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East? Did people perhaps think that the great British sense of fair play would cause the case to be altered? The situation in some British cities may not inaptly be compared to that which existed in rural areas of England at the time of the Second Crusade in the middle of the 12th century. At that time, few ordinary people had travelled far from their homes, and many had grown up never having seen the city. It is said that when a contingent from the countryside between Hereford and Worcester arrived at Gloucester, one yokel was so amazed at the sight of a city that he flew to attack the first people his troop encountered. He was under the impression that they had arrived at Jerusalem and mistook the citizens of Gloucester for Saracens. A similarly parochial outlook now exists among young people in cities such as London and Birmingham. So restricted is their outlook that they regard those living a few streets away as mortal enemies, their horizons and loyalties bounded by areas of a couple of square miles at most. Multiculturalism was devised by white Western people who didn't realise that many minorities despise each other with as much unreasoning vigour as some white people feel towards black people or those from South Asia. Africans express contempt for Caribbeans, regarding them as a mongrel people. For their own part, an awful lot of Caribbeans regard Africans as being backward and unsophisticated. Ghanaian Ashantis do not care for Nigerians, and among Nigerians themselves there are sharp divisions between Igbo and Yoruba, with memories of the Biafran War still causing ill feeling. Muslims do not mix with Hindus, and Sikhs prefer to keep themselves to themselves. The central concept of multiculturalism, that all these historic divisions will somehow be immediately healed if the various parties can only be persuaded to amicably live and work side by side with well-meaning and progressive white citizens, is a fantasy. However desirable such a state of affairs might be, it's unlikely to come to fruition in our lifetimes, or very likely during the lives of our children's children either.